Welcome back, guys, to the episode of the Football Universe podcast. I'm with my co-host, Max.
What's up, guys?
We're still waiting on Ian. He ran into some family busyness today, whatever he unfortunately ran into. But we're back with another episode here. We pretty much covered every single team in the preseason last week. And this week, we're going to just cover the news that happened within the week. Obviously, this preseason games, there's not really to talk much about them. I feel like at this point in the preseason, especially late, you have some of the starters coming back in.
The only thing I can say about preseason football is offensive line play is non-existent.
That has been very true. The offensive line play, what I've seen, has been pretty bad. With that being said, heading right into the news, I guess the first one is going to be J.K. Dobbins out for the year with the Acl Tear. That is of today. Pretty big loss for the Ravens. Obviously, the Ravens, especially the running back position over the past couple of years, have ran pretty thin. Go back 2 years ago, they had Mark Ingram. I think that they had Dobbins that year too. I'm trying to remember.
Last year was Dobbins' rookie year.
Yeah, last year was Dobbins' rookie year. Who was the other running back that ran off of Ingram that year? I can't remember. Maybe. Didn't they have like?
I mean, I'm just talking there.
Yeah. Didn't they have like Alex Collins 1 year? So
yeah, they had him 1 year. This was several years ago.
Yeah, but either way, J.K. Dobbins' rookie year was last year. So they had that Mark Ingram, J.K. Dobbins, Mark Ingram. I believe he's no longer with the team, correct? I can't remember off the top of my head. Yes.
Mark Ingram's not on the team anymore. Were you saying he wanted?
Yeah, I forget. What team did he sign with? Did he sign with the team? I forgot.
I don't know that he's on a team right now.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to look into that. That being said, J.K. Dobbins out for the year. Had a solid rookie year for the Ravens last year. And with him being out, this offense was already looking kind of iffy. Not really sure how it's going to pan out now because remember, the struggle for the Ravens last year was their generation of a run was decent, but especially the passing game was pretty horrific. They didn't have really a lot of wide receivers. Obviously, they went ahead and drafted a receiver in this draft. Marquise Brown is hopefully going to step up. But if you can't, put together a stable running game with a running back, you kind of limit yourself again on offense. This could be a big blow to the Ravens offense down the stretch. They might have to rely on Lamar Jackson putting the ball in his hands and using his feet again a lot this year. And we know last year, did not work out as well as they wanted it to down the stretch. Max?
No, this is a huge loss for the Ravens. Last year, it wasn't like the whole year he was doing great, but he started to take up toward the end of the year. Then Mark Ingram kind of took a step back, and of course that led to him being released. But just based on how the Ravens depend on the run game, because between Lamar and they were supposed to be Lamar and J.K. Dobbins. Now that you don't have any J.K. Dobbins, that's essentially one half of the picture. He was supposed to be their workhorse. Now what do? Here's what they do. So I was thinking today, okay, who could the Ravens essentially trade for? Because we saw with another move we're going to talk about here later, the Pats traded Sony Michel to the Rams because the Rams were kind of thin after Cam Akers went down with his injury. Here's what the Ravens do. Go trade for Marlon Mack. He's the third running back on the Colts, I believe. I really don't know why he re-signed with them, but think of them. They have Jonathan Taylor, who's going to be their workhorse. Nyheim Hines is kind of going to be their shifty, kind of explosive guy. They really don't have any use for Marlon Mack. I don't know about any because it doesn't really hurt to have a player for that cheap on your team, but they could easily get like a fifth and a sixth, maybe not quite that much. They could easily get something for Marlon Mack. The Ravens are going to be pretty desperate. And you get a guy who's rushed for 1,000 yards 2 years ago because last year he was out with an injury. Bring him in. I don't think it's going to replace what Dobbins would have done, but I think it's at least going to help a lot.
I hadn't thought about that, but I honest to God, that is a fantastic trade proposition you just put there. Marlon Mack, we all kind of forget about him. Was it 2 years ago now? Last year, he was
last year he got hurt in week one.
That's right. I remember that. 2 years ago, he was essentially an elite running back.
He was back, I believe. It was him and Nyheim Hines.
Yeah, he was nearly an elite running back that year, and he's just kind of fallen off. Maybe, I want to say Carson Wentz situation, but opposite of Carson Wentz situation, we're moving away from the Colts here. Maybe a change of pace, change of scenery might be good for him, and he would fill the Dobbins role. It makes a lot of sense. So I definitely think that's a pretty good trade proposition there. What do you guys think? Leave it down in the comments below. It's pretty interesting. Moving off of that, the next running back, unfortunately, to have a major injury is going to be Travis Etienne. It's funny, me and Max talked about this right before he hopped on. I had referred to him as Etienne for the longest time. Again, I've been watching the Clemson for quite some years now, probably like 3-4 years. Since Trevor Lawrence pretty much got into Clemson, I started watching Clemson pretty strictly because I wanted to see how Trevor Lawrence panned out. And, I've been watching Travis Etienne for the longest, and I had referred to him as Etienne, but pretty funny story right there. Moving on from there, fact is, foot injury is going to take him out for the entire year. I don't think it's as big of a blow to the Jaguars as it is for their counterpart, the Ravens, in this situation. However, two things. Obviously, he's a running back, rookie running backs. Without our, rookie running backs, especially running backs in general in the NFL, injuries can really derail their career. They're a very replaceable position in the NFL. So having a major injury like that could push him back some. Obviously, they're not going to cut him or anything like that. He's a rookie running back. They're going to give him another year. He has that Clemson connection with Lawrence. However, I'm sure the only person who's probably ecstatic about that, not publicly, of course, who's kind of ecstatic about it would be James Robinson. After having a pretty fantastic year last year, to say the least, as an undrafted running back, they pretty much got somebody to replace him. And it was, I'm sure, if I remember correctly, you can't remember he went public or not about it or not, but it's got to be a lot of question marks in his head. Like, I performed last year and you're trying to replace me already. What is happening here? Yeah, I can't remember, but obviously in his head, he's got to be thinking that. And this gives him another opportunity this year to prove it. He puts up big yards again this year. He's their starting running back. Etienne becomes their backup running back. I don't think you can do it any other way. James Robinson just has to put together another season like he did last year. He's going to be able to be that starting running back for the Jaguars to solidify his spot. Obviously, Travis's injury gives him a perfect opportunity to do so.
Yeah, I think this injury is honestly going to continue to show that the pick to pick Etienne in the first round was really not smart, because they had James Robinson, and he had 1 year unexpectedly. But my counterpoint is he's 22, and the track record of undrafted guys doing well, when they do well early on, they're going to do pretty well because they play with that chip on their shoulder that they want to prove that they're that good. And I guess I really don't think it's a huge loss. I think that James Robinson can replace what he was going to do. So, it's really all I have to say. It's obviously sucks when anyone gets hurt, but I don't think it's going to hurt the Jaguars that much. Again, like I said, I believe on last week's podcast, I thought that pick was more just to get Trevor's teammate and get a good name on their team instead of doing what they should have done, which is protecting him or pulling home their defense. They didn't need him at all at that point.
100%. So I guess moving on from there, again, I'm going down a list, jotted down quick notes before we hopped on here. Carson Wentz, he's pretty much set to be back for week 1 at this point. It's looking more and more like that. Pretty big for the Colts there, obviously. They traded for Wentz. They really need him to start. So good news for the Colts there. I don't know if you have any comments about that, Max.
Well, I will say the whole thing when he was going to be out for 5 to 12 weeks, that was such an interesting timeline, because you're talking, okay, he could be back for week 1 or he could be out till November.
Yeah.
So, I was shocked that it wasn't going to be somewhere in between that. But I will say the Colts are dropping like flies. T.Y. Hilton apparently just went down today with a disc injury.
Yeah.
They saying he's going to miss a bunch of games. Someone else, not Quentin Nelson, because he's also in the same status as Wentz, where he was going to be out for 5 to 12 weeks. And he'll be back for week 1 apparently. Someone else I saw went down. Like, I just can't remember who it was off the top of my head. I do think it was pretty significant though.
I don't know the name.
I could have sworn I saw that, but I kind of joke about this with my friends, but a part of me does kind of believe it. If you're the Titans, anything less than an AFC South title this year, and you need to start looking for people's jobs.
Yeah, I think Frank Reich is a good coach, though. So I don't necessarily think he's the issue.
Point, like the Colts don't have anywhere near the talent we do, especially on offense.
That's true. Again, we talked about it last week. Titans are pretty much solidified. In my opinion, they got this division unlocked. It's their division to lose.
I personally look at it not as a point of like, oh, my team's best are going to win. I look at it as more as, no, the expectation is you win. If not, then it's a failed season.
Very true. Moving on from there, which is probably my favorite thing of the entire week. Gardner Minshew is on the move. He's no longer a Jacksonville Jaguar. He is now headed to the Philadelphia Eagles, which creates a interesting sort of setup with the Eagles now. Obviously, as we know, they moved Carson Wentz to, well, they didn't move him, but they pretty much got rid of him to the Colts in order for Jalen Hurts to step up and be the starting quarterback. So now they bring in Gardner Minshew, and I'm just curious about why they're doing this. I thought it was pretty set in stone. You get rid of Carson Wentz, you're making a clear decision. We want Jalen Hurts as our future of this franchise. But now you're bringing in Gardner Minshew, and again, I'm pretty sure it was for a 6th-round pick. You're not trading a lot there. But I think Gardner Minshew, I'm going to say this again. I've watched him since he came from out of the draft, and I've watched clips, and I think I watched him 1 year at Washington State. I think he has the ability to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. I don't know if he's going to be a superstar or have any level of talent, but I think he's that quarterback that you put a really talented team around him and he can win you a Super Bowl because he's a leader. Again, I don't know if he's really there talent-wise, but he's a leader and he's good about what he does. He's enough to get the job done. So I think, Jalen Hurts starts playing bad. Gardner Minshew is a very nice emergency option. I like the trade for Gardner Minshew. He had no place on the Jaguars at this point. Trevor Lawrence is there to start. When you have the hype and the talent that Trevor Lawrence has, he's going to be there at least 5-6 years, I'd imagine. Let's say Trevor Lawrence has the worst possible career. He's still there 5 to 6 years. They're going to hold on to him and ride him out, which I don't think he will be. I think Trevor Lawrence is a stud. Don't get me wrong. It's just if he performs as bad as possible, Gardner Minshew is locked in that backup position, really wasting him. So I like the trade for the Jaguars. I like the trade for the Eagles in terms of giving them that option. The only question it leaves me with is the Eagles' direction. Again, I like that it gives them the option of having Gardner Minshew, but at the same time, direction-wise, who's your starting quarterback? I thought we solved this a couple months ago when we got rid of Carson Wentz.
I personally did not see it that way. I saw Hurts. He looks good in spurts, but I really never thought he looked like he was going to be their clear-cut starter. And I like this move by the Eagles. It creates competition. Two guys are going to go there. We know Hurts has that championship mentality. He played at Alabama. He's there with Oklahoma. Had issues with getting over the hump, but in terms of being a good leader and wanting to win, he's that guy. And then you get Minshew in there, he's going to be motivated too. I think that's about what you could ask for a team like the Eagles, because they look like they're going to go to rebuilding, although they kind of can't because they kind of locked themselves into a couple bad years with all the contracts they gave out. But I think it's a good move. And for the Jaguars, they kind of had to get rid of him because there's really no point in keeping a guy like that. Even if you trade him for a 6th-round pick, what are you really going to do there? I have been hearing talk about how, and I don't know if it's true, don't get me wrong. I've been hearing talk about how the Jags almost were going to start Minshew because they feared Trevor getting hurt because of their offensive line. And I'll just say right now, if that's true, I think it's a terrible look for the Jags because you don't want to put someone in because of the possibility of them getting injured. Fix your offensive line. It's that simple. That's how quarterbacks can't be with an offensive line. I understand it, but I think that makes them look really bad if it's true.
And just going off of what you said, I don't necessarily disagree with you. I don't think Jalen Hurts really locked in the position in terms of talent-wise or what he put on the field. I just thought it was the way the Eagles were going with the fact that they're getting rid of Carson Wentz. It's not necessarily a talent thing. It's more of a direction thing that I see it as. A. B. I 100% agree with you. Fix the offensive line for the Jaguars. It's kind of interesting to me because it's pretty obvious, but what more proof do you need than the Bengals are even guilty of it themselves. What more proof do you need than the Bengals losing Joe Burrow last year to a horrible injury, goes out for the year? And why did that even happen in the first place? Bad offensive line play.
Did anyone watch the Super Bowl this past year?
Bad offensive line play, lost the Chiefs the game.
Yeah.
And it's just, I think the Chiefs are a little bit deeper than that, but either way, it's just the offensive line is so important, especially when you have a rookie quarterback. Give him more time in the pocket to make decisions, let him progress. And teams are just avoiding it. And I can't understand why. Again, just going off the Bengals is a good example. You have a flashy piece, and going back to the Jaguars too, you have Etienne. Both players, flashy pieces, they're going to look great on the field. They'll sell jerseys, et cetera, et cetera. They're not going to provide you wins like a solidifying your offensive line. So it just makes no sense to me. When are teams going to learn? And again, look, the Chiefs get there because they have so much talent outside of the offensive line that they can do that. It's only when you verse a really good pass rushing team like the Buccaneers had last year that you really see an issue with that. And they have a great coach. Franchises like the Jaguars and the Bengals, notorious for having bad coaching, bad leadership, top down. They are a mess of franchises. They need the offensive line. The Chiefs, Patriots, they can coach around it because they have that talented coaches.
At least the Chiefs, both their offensive tackles were out. That was a legitimate excuse.
Yes, that too. That as well. There's alternated reasons there between their offensive line actually got injured. Not that they didn't care about it. Their offensive line pretty much got them where they were or helped to get them where they were. And they have coaches that can coach outside of it. Jaguars and the Bengals just don't have that. And they won't learn for whatever reason.
It's just so frustrating seeing a bunch of these organizations. For example, the Browns 2 years ago, They had guys like OBJ, Jarvis
Mhm.
Landry, Nick Chubb. It's all this flash and pizzazz, but if you can't block,
Mhm.
you're never going to be successful. And that year in 2019, the Browns had no tackles. They obviously fixed that, but
Mhm.
that was one of the many flaws they had. It's kind of the same thing with the Steelers this year. All this flash and pizzazz with Claypool, Juju, Najee Harris. People like, oh, this offense is loaded, but you can't block. If you can't allow those plays to develop,
Mhm.
your players are going to get hurt and your plays are going to go nowhere. I just, that Super Bowl showed the offensive line is the biggest weapon a quarterback can have.
And not to forget Ben's horrible arm at this point.
Yeah.
I just, I just don't understand when these teams are going to learn, and they're going to continue to be bad franchises until that happens. And I put my money on it this year that the Bengals are not going to see that much success, nor the Jaguars. And a major piece that you're going to see, they're going to see those two
Bengals
teams
at
give
least
up
did something. What do the Jaguars
yes,
do? Like,
very
besides
true.
franchise tagging Cam Robinson.
And you're gonna see them have offensive line. You're gonna see the pass rush get home, and it's gonna be a major cause for a lot of their losses this year. And then speaking of the Browns, look at the Browns' offensive line now. Better. Wyatt Teller pretty much progressed to an elite guard. It gives them a chance this year. It could be the difference. Well, look at the Browns' offensive line this year, and then on top of Nick Chubb being Nick Chubb, and then the whole offense behind it, offensive line's gotten better. Baker Mayfield's gotten better. There's a reason for it. These things happen.
The Browns fixed it immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And now, going back to the Dobbins thing, with the Browns fixing their errors and learning, I definitely think now they'll win the AFC North. It's not kind of just like, I think they'll win, but be surprised. No, I am like all in on the Browns winning that division.
Yeah, I feel like the more and more we talk about it, it just seems more. And I forgot they got why am I blanking on his name? The tackle out of Alabama.
Jedrick Wills.
Jedrick Wills, thank you. So
and then they got Jack Conklin. They fixed that immediately.
Mm-hmm. Conklin, Wills, Wyatt Teller looked at offensive line. That is an elite offensive line. If they perform as a cohesive unit, they're one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. They have talented receivers with OBJ, Jarvis Landry. Austin Hooper's a solid tight end. David Njoku, he's okay, but didn't really pan out to how they want, but still a solid backup tight end. Going back to the running back position, I forget, do they still have Kareem Hunt on the roster?
They do.
They do. They still have Kareem Hunt.
That was one of the guys I was going to suggest the Ravens maybe trade for, but of course they'll never trade in the division.
Exactly. So you have Kareem Hunt, and then you have Nick Chubb. So that offense is loaded on top of their defense. Again, as I said in last week's podcast, one of the most talented teams in the NFL, and them addressing their offensive line, it's going to make a difference this year, and you're going to see it. So moving on from there, we have the Broncos. I think they're a really interesting story here. So going off of the things that I feel like are less to talk about, Sutton is back. Courtney Sutton, who was very good going into last season. I forget what he injured, ACL, was out for the entire.
That's what it was.
Yeah, I think it was an ACL injury. Was out for the entire year. I drafted him. I was pissed off about it because he was doing so good at first.
As well.
Yeah. So he goes down. He was a great third piece. And then also Von Miller's back, who also went down with the season injury last year. It should be interesting to see where Von Miller fits in this season because he kind of regressed, in the last year or two. Still one of the top elite pass rushers in the league, don't get me wrong, but wasn't the top of his class. People like TJ Watt have kind of surpassed him at this point. Interesting to see how he bounces back from an injury. And I know they played a little bit in that preseason game, which I think was yesterday, the day before. Again, I can't judge everything off of preseason. Preseason for the starters and the people that are going to start, it's pretty much pointless. They're going against a lot of second and third teamers. Sometimes first teamers is a mixed bag of goods right there. So it's really hard to judge like how good they're doing when they're going against players like that. So more importantly, I think for the Broncos, Teddy Bridgewater is now the starting quarterback for the Denver Broncos. They have canned Drew Lock as for now. So what does this mean going forward? I'm going to say this. I think I said in last week's podcast, I don't think either Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater is the answer at quarterback long-term for the Broncos. B, this could be the end of Drew Lock's career as a starter. They obviously don't believe him anymore. And I feel like he could end up in another Gardner Minshew situation where obviously he's being replaced by Teddy Bridgewater, let alone the Broncos do somewhat bad and they're not going to have another Trevor Lawrence, obviously, but they draft another first-round quarterback. Where does Drew Lock end up as a career backup? Unless he gets traded, it's not looking good for Drew Lock. And I had a lot of belief in him going into the NFL. I watched his tape on film. I thought he was a quarterback, good leader, had a pretty strong arm. he's just not putting it together. His decision making in the NFL has been poor, to say the least, and it's now cost him his starting job. Max?
Yeah. When you lose your starting job to Teddy Bridgewater, a guy who didn't play well last year, blew out his knee several years ago, was never the same. 2.5 weeks before the season, you're pretty much done. I really don't think there's a lot to say there. I never believed in Drew Lock after last year, and now I'm like, I don't know what else there is to say. I think it's pretty much done for him, and maybe being a backup, but as a starter, I think he can say goodbye to that. As for the Courtney Sutton thing, people don't talk about the Broncos receiver group, but between him, Jerry Jeudy, and KJ Hamler, they could have one of the scariest cores in the league. Obviously, they have to get a good quarterback, but they're building something special. The Broncos are one of those teams. I don't know about the Broncos. They seem to have a lot of good pieces.
Yeah.
They just, something about them between quarterbacks and just the important things, they could just never get it together for some reason.
I mean, offensively, they kind of put together a juggernaut last year, minus the quarterback position. Melvin Gordon, Phillip Lindsay. The issue ultimately came down. I think their defense is kind of lackluster at this point, and that probably hurts them a little bit too. Look at their defense; it was full of veteran players, and it's really aged out at this point. So I think maybe
look at the secondary: Justin Simmons, Kyle Fuller, Pat Surtain could pan out too.
Also true.
Linebacker's pretty thin, but like not a bad unit.
That's also true. I was thinking about it. I forgot about they drafted Surtain off the top of my head, but I was thinking about Chris Harris Jr. Obviously, no longer there. But Justin Simmons emerged as an elite safety. So honestly, thank you for correcting me. You were right. At the same time, again, they have a lot of decent pieces they can't put together. Moving on from there, we have the Patriots have now traded Sony Michel to the Rams. Interesting. Sony Michel drafted as, I think it was a first-round draft pick. Was it 3 years ago now for the Patriots?
His 2018, yeah.
Yeah. So his rookie year, fantastic. Had nearly 1,000 rushing yards. I can't remember how many touchdowns, but looked to be possibly one of the elite running backs going into the future of the NFL. Gets injured. Yeah, and then I think he hasn't been like out for the season. I don't think he was last year, but he's constantly he constantly comes in and out. He's constantly injured one week, healthy the next week. I'm sure the Patriots got tired of it, and based on what the first round draft pick they wasted on him. I want to say wasted on him, but used on him because I think it's not set in stone what his career is going to end up as. It's kind of a waste
when you turn your first round into a fourth and a sixth. Like
that's very true. I'll give you that. So in that terms, yes, it's a waste. He gave him a good couple of years. I think he's a solid running back. But obviously with how the Patriots use running backs, I don't necessarily think he was a need for the Patriots regardless. The Patriots love swapping out running backs and having a specific running back for a specific play or a specific formation based upon their abilities. And that's how Bill Belichick works. So Sony Michel, even when he was healthy, he was only getting a limited amount of carries, not because he did anything wrong, but that's just how Bill Belichick works. So I think giving Sony Michel a feature back position, being the first string back for the Rams should be interesting. With that being said, going back to the Rams side of things, I like the trade for them. I see it as sort of a rental though. Obviously Cam Akers is out for the season. Huge loss for the Rams there. I think he had a pretty fantastic rookie season. I was really excited to watch him this year. That guy is so fast and is really explosive. I love watching him at the running back position for the Rams. Sad to see him out for the season. I don't know what they're going to do once Cam Akers comes back. Are they going to have a dual running back set? Are they going to they're going to dump Sony Michel? I'd imagine they're going to give Cam Akers a start when he comes back because he did have such a good season. He shows a lot of promise. That being said, what do you do with Sony Michel then? So I kind of see it as a rental. But either way, I'm happy to see Sony Michel off the Patriots because if that rookie year is indication of his potential, then I think him being on a different team is going to help him his career in the long term.
Yeah, I honestly am right with you on just about everything you said there.
Mm-hmm.
It's a shame that he really didn't pan out in New England like he wanted to, and he was a key part of their Super Bowl run. So I mean, you can't. I don't think you can call him like a bust.
Yeah,
not what you wanted a first round pick, obviously, but unfortunately, that's just not how Belichick does things. He kind of likes to do it more running back by committee. So it kind of felt by circumstance there to some extent. For the Rams, I definitely think it's a smart move because, as I said earlier, they needed a guy to help replace Cam Akers, and it seems like they got that, a guy who, knowing what his ceiling is, could be very useful for them. And I'm 100% with you. I think this is a one-year rental.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't invest much into him. It's just so they can compete this year because this is an all-in team with picking the first round, I don't think, until 2024. And that's how much they've given up to win now. So, and
Exactly.
they could franchise tag him. They won't do that because they have Cam Akers. They could be much more wise to use that elsewhere. And for Sony, he's going to want to leave too because they're not going to want to pay him. He could maximize his value elsewhere. Yeah, I think this is definitely a one-year move unless something unforeseen happens.
And with them acquiring Sony Michel, be thinking of it now, the Rams do terrible this year, maybe next year too. You could see them absolutely liquidate their entire team. As you said, they have no first-round draft picks till about 2024. Don't be surprised they do bad this year. They do bad next year. You see everybody go. Aaron Donald could be on the trading block for all we know. Again, this is a couple years. This is a year or two down the line, but you got to liquidate the team. They have no first-round draft picks, and now even for Sony Michel, you get up to 4th and the 6th. Given you're generally not going to get a ton of talent out of those picks, but trading Sony Michel away is a good start to get some of those picks back. Maybe package them in with an Aaron Donald. It'd be a crazy trade if it involved Aaron Donald, but regardless, this, as you said, this is kind of a make it or break it year for the Rams, and they need Sony Michel. They need a feature back to be able to have a running game because it's going to be huge for them. So going off of that, we have Justin Reed. Interesting enough, obviously safety for the Texans, as we talked about last week, the worst team in the NFL. Me and Max are generally in agreement on that. If the worst, one of the worst. He kicked off for the Texans and pretty decent kick, not gonna lie. I think I forget what team they were playing, but he returned it. They returned it maybe an extra 10 yards, roughly the 25-yard line, whatever it was. My question for this is this the future of the position of the NFL? This is more of a fun type of question. Obviously, Justin Reed's a safety, right? However, compared to a regular kicker, kickers typically can't tackle. They're smaller guys. They're not really built to tackle, especially on kickoff or anything like that. Do players like Justin Reed, who can do both, like an OBJ, we know also can kick. He can't really tackle that well. Are they the future of the position of a kicker position in the NFL? Again, more of a fun question. I think possibly if you can do both, because going over the MLB, right? You have Shohei Ohtani, who's one of the best pitchers in the league, but is by far probably the best hitter in the league, next to Vlad Guerrero Jr. So you have those players that can kind of do it all, and it's just interesting because when you have somebody like Justin Reed kicking off, you don't lose out on the extra player that kind of sits back and can't really tackle, and you hope to God that they don't have to make the tackle to save a touchdown. Justin Reed can tackle. He's a nearly an elite safety in the NFL, so it provides them an extra safety net on the kickoff. So I think if you could find players that could do both, the kicker might be slowly eliminated from the NFL. However, you also got to factor in the fact that the kickers need to be able to hit precise field goals from 50 plus yards out. I don't think Justin Reed really has that ability, but maybe there are people that can, and maybe that Justin Reed might train for that. Obviously not in particular, but a player like Justin Reed could train for that. I don't know. I think it's an interesting question. I saw it as a comment on Instagram, and I was like, would be a decent segment to talk about. So what are your thoughts, Max?
That's actually really interesting. So totally not going to lie. When I saw you, I didn't know Justin Reed kicked off for the Texans, and I looked at that on the document we created, and I saw the future of the position. I'm like, what do you mean? Because I never knew this happened, but I think you make a good point about, especially for kickoffs, because if you want guys out there that can make open field tackles like that, that could be a more useful option than, if all you're trying to do, all you have to do is just make sure you kick the ball down the field, don't kick it out of bounds. I feel like most of us if we have a tee, we can, maybe we won't hit it that far, but I think most of us to know to hit it not out of bounds. So I think that could work. I definitely don't. Kickers are going to be around because you have to kick the ball in the uprights. So unfortunately, we're not going to see Justin Reed kicking field goals like 50 yards out, even for extra points. That's not going to happen. But if other teams take note of this, maybe they will start using safeties and those guys on kickoffs.
You made a good point, a good distinction that I was about to bring up, but you probably brought it up first. It'd be difficult to really assign them to doing field goals because, again, it takes a lot more precision. However, kickoffs are all game. Just don't kick it between, just kick it in bounds and make a play. That's generally how it is on kickoffs. As a former player myself and just football rules in general, you have setups like we're kicking it off to the right. There's a certain way that you file in and you close down on the ball carrier. At the end of the day, it generally never works out like that because it's so hard to predict where people are going to block, whether they use a wedge or something like that, even though it's technically illegal now. But obviously, it depends on the formation that they set up in for the kick return. Either way, at the end of the day, it becomes a kind of a gobbled mess, and you basically just close down on the runner and you make a tackle. So as long as you get it between the two out of bounds lines, you have the shot to have a decent kickoff. And instead of maybe having a backup kicker on the roster, you just have somebody like Justin Reed, and that might be really useful. So yeah, I don't know. It's a really interesting question. Let us know what you guys think down below. Do you guys think that safeties or people that can tackle could be a future position in the NFL to replace kickers? So going on from there, we have Shaq Lawson to the Jets. Interesting trade there. Gives the Jets an extra. I think pretty sure Shaq Lawson's a pass rusher, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah.
I don't know why I blanked on that for a second, but decent trade for the Jets. I don't know if it's really going to make a difference for them. I just think, Houston Texans, again, liquidating more players because they're falling apart as a franchise. And that's kind of it, in my opinion. Anything else to say about there, Max?
I believe this is the second time this offseason Lawson's been traded. I think he was traded like around free agency from the Dolphins and the Texans. Now they traded him. I mean, yes. I think you can pretty much call this guy a bust at this point. He was a first-round pick. He's been bouncing around. It feels like he's just living on the edge at this point, doing everything. His career is kind of hanging by the skin of his teeth. There's really not a whole lot else to say. The Jets didn't really get an impact player here.
Yeah, I was thinking that, and I couldn't remember. I'm pretty sure he got traded not too long ago. So, yeah. So that being said, our last segment of today's podcast, decently big news here. Minnesota Vikings re-signed Harrison Smith to a 4-year, $64 million contract extension. Pretty interesting there. That's a lot of money to tie into a safety. However, Harrison Smith has been, I'd probably say, top 3 safeties in the NFL for the past 5 years now. A guy that really goes under the radar. You don't hear much about him, but he is a very talented, go watch his film. Guy's fantastic. Knows how to replays, make tackles. Very good safety. And with that being said, I do question, they now lock him in for another 4 years, $64 million. The guy's 32 already. That regression is going to hit soon. And I don't know if you want to lock him in for that long, for that amount of money. Has he earned it? Yes. But again, considering his age, think about the long term. You're locking in a lot of money for a safety that is going to regress, because he's not a quarterback, right? He's going to regress as his athleticism declines as he gets older. So I just question how much money you spent to lock in an older safety. Other than that, great player, no doubt about it. Again, just how long is he going to be a great player?
Not only that, but if you look at the Vikings organization, they're kind of a team that's kind of stuck in neutrals. We talked about last week. They're kind of locked into being second best in their division, if even that. So it's knowing how, and this team honestly is one of those frustratingly inconsistent teams that seems to fluctuate between playoff, no playoff. It kind of goes in that cycle for them all the time. So I feel like this year was a crossroads year for them to see where they were going to be. And I don't think now is the time to pull the trigger on that, especially for an older player like that. If you're going to pay Justin Jefferson, which obviously he's not eligible yet, but if you're going to pay him, fine. He's a cornerstone receiver. He's in his early 20s. Yeah, pay him. He'll be around for the long haul. Not Harrison Smith, though. So
that's the thing.
Not that's a terrible deal. You could certainly do a lot worse, but it doesn't seem like it makes much sense at the moment.
You let Harrison Smith walk, after his contract's up.
At the very least, you gain cap space.
Exactly. You take that money, you put it into Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson, again, look at the numbers, is on pace to be the best wide receiver in NFL history based upon his rookie year if he continues to progress and do what he's doing. I'm not saying he's going to be. I'm saying that he could. He has that potential. The numbers line up. Lock him in. Take that money and lock in Justin Jefferson. That's how I see it.
They already paid Dalvin Cook, which he's worth it for sure.
Exactly. And I totally forgot to mention Dalvin Cook on last week's podcast, but how could you, after the fantastic year that he had last year, I definitely should have. Shout out to Dalvin Cook. Put respect to your name when I was talking about how the Vikings go. Again, I think he's a top 5 running back in the NFL, and he
top
probably
3,
doesn't get.
I think
That's true. Honestly, yeah. And I feel like his name doesn't even get out there that much because it's the Vikings. Really, it happens to do with the market that he's in, Minnesota. But again, top 5, top 3 running back in the NFL. He doesn't get talked about enough. So shout out to Dalvin Cook. Definitely deserves respect on his name. Do you have any other comments, Max?
Not really. That's all I have to say.
All right, guys. Well, that concludes our pod.
Say one thing.
Go for it.
Before people are wondering, I'm currently recording in my bathroom. I didn't realize my room is a very dim light, and I couldn't record because it was so dark. But I'm in here and I'm sitting literally on my wall. So if you've seen any weird moves with the camera or whatever, you wonder where I am, just letting you know that's what's happening right now.
Anything for the good lighting to get that fantastic beard in place, of course.
Exactly. And the jersey and hat.
100%. Actually, before we go, shout out to Connie for dropping Don. I've been waiting that for 3 weeks. Has shouted out on the podcast. Totally unrelated to football. Other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed listening. It was definitely a fun podcast this week, a little bit shorter. I think it's definitely towards the time mark that we're aiming to look at. A little bit more consumable for you guys rather than a 2-hour podcast. We kind of had to cover everything that was in the off season. We're trying to cover it all. So next week, hopefully we'll have Ian back, and we'll have some more football to talk about. So it's going to be a good ride here. I'm excited for the beginning of the football season. I'm sure you are, Max, too. Other than that, thank you guys for listening. We'll catch you guys on the next episode.